What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson, and my other co-host, Collin Alcaves. And the New York Rangers have a pretty interesting line developing here for the current 2023-24 season, headlined by one player who has been rather polarizing so far this year, and that is Blake Wheeler, the veteran forward that the Rangers signed this offseason. Hasn't exactly lived up to expectations for most Rangers fans. So today, we're going to go ahead and discuss how his season has looked so far, whether we think he's going to turn it around or if we think he's going to continue to struggle, and everything else about Wheeler. But before we dive into all that, make sure to like if you do enjoy this episode, subscribe to the channel if you are new, ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And make sure to go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Rangers. Without further ado, Eric, I will start with you. How are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on Blake Wheeler's performance so far this season?
I'm doing good. It's good to be back in the saddle. Rangers have a big game tomorrow against Calgary that they're going to be playing up against, and hopefully Wheeler can get something going because with what I've seen in the first 5 games, I'm not impressed. I know it's still very, very early on in the season, so there's hope for a turnaround, but just overall, I'm not impressed. I got not much good to say in this episode.
All right, well, I'll turn that over to you, Colin, because I know that you're feeling a little bit better about Wheeler's performance. So how are you doing today, my friend, and what are your thoughts on the way Blake Wheeler's performed?
I'm good. Coming off a strong game against the Kraken. I'm excited to see them hopefully put together back-to-back games. I'm kind of sick of this every other game we show up efforts. So I'm hoping that we'll continue the strong play that I saw against the Kraken, and I'm hoping that Wheeler will actually be a factor in this one. I know that Eric isn't too fond of him so far, but I think, as Eric said, it's also still very early, and there's a lot of time left for him to improve.
Yeah, it is very early in the season, and the Rangers have looked a little bit inconsistent. Certain lines have looked better than others. And I think that there's some stats that back up that Wheeler's line has been playing at a very high level, but not necessarily because of him. So, Eric, I'm wondering how you feel about that, because do you think that Wheeler is potentially holding back his line or the high level of efficiency and some of the stats I know that you wrote about in your article today? Do you think that that line is playing as well as it is in spite of Blake Wheeler, or do you think that there are some attributes to his game that are contributing to the line's success?
So I think overall that line has looked pretty solid. I know they are third currently in the league for expected goals percentage, which means statistically on paper they're playing very, very well. But just when I'm watching the games and I'm seeing them skate around, I'm not really impressed by it. Especially Wheeler in particular, he hasn't scored a single point. He's at 0 points in 5 games played. So offensively, nothing good there. He's a -3 when he's on the ice, so even defensively, he's not there. He started off the season on the second power play unit, was recently booted off of that, and then he was being tested out on the penalty kill. So I think overall that third line, Cooley, he's had a very, very good start. He's a fast, physical grinder that's not afraid to get his hands dirty. Vincent Trocheck is Vincent Trocheck. We've seen what he can contribute last season, and he's maintained pretty much all of his skills heading into this year. And then there's just Blake Wheeler. I think that one game against Seattle where the Rangers played very, very good, as Collin mentioned earlier, Wheeler kind of just looked like he was just skating in circles, just having a good time. So is he holding the line back? I want to say yes, because if there was someone else there who's going to produce points and make good defensive plays, that would be very, very helpful. But statistically on paper, that expected goals percentage is very, very high, third in the league across 32 teams with 4 lines each. So I don't know. It's a hard one to analyze.
So, Colin, then what is your analysis of it? Because, like you said, you thought that he was just skating around, not performing well, not doing much for the Blue Shirts. But you look at that line, and that line is playing at a really high level, despite Blake Wheeler having 0 points and being -3. So, how are you feeling about the way that he's performing, and do you think that he is holding back the line in any way this season?
I think in the O zone, he's definitely a bit of a liability, but I think that we also have to remember, we talk about it with Kako and with Laughlin, with Hedl, and all the young prospects. The game is so much bigger than just points, and while he might not have any points, and the -3 is kind of crappy, he's still doing so much more, I feel like, in his own zone. He's not like a complete defensive liability, and I think he kind of anchors that line, and he's the veteran presence that you kind of need in that line. So I'm excited to see what he does going forward. I think he needs to take more shots. I'm looking here. He has 12 total shots attempted, which is just way too low through 5 games so far. I think he needs to try and put the puck on net a little bit more. But yeah, no, the bounces haven't come his way yet. I think, obviously, I don't think he's going to get back to the 55-point mark he had the season prior, or the 60 mark that he had 2 years ago. But I think you can still mark him down for a solid 40 points, which is solid production from a third liner.
Definitely. But Eric, one thing that you said there is that you think he is holding back the line, and you wonder if someone else could help propel this line even further. So I want to get your thoughts on the idea of the Rangers maybe making a call up here, maybe taking somebody up from Hartford. I know Brennan Othmann is a player that a lot of Rangers fans want to see get some NHL playing time at some point this season. How short of a leash do you think Blake Wheeler has? And do you think that Othmann could maybe see some NHL playing time soon? Or do you think we're still a long ways away from that happening?
Yeah, I mean, just based on his AHL stats so far, Othmann does look like he's pretty much ready for the NHL. Now, obviously, I know the Rangers are being very, very careful with his development. They don't want to rush him into anything too soon until he's 100% ready to go. And then there's also the argument that he shouldn't be in the bottom 6. I know you'll agree with me on that, Collin, where like we've seen it with Lafreniere, we've seen it with Kakko, we've seen it with Hedl. The Rangers can't keep burying their top prospects on the third line that's really meant to play defensively and grind and have those puck battles against the boards. Othmann is the type of player who needs to be on the first or second line. So unless like Lafreniere or Kakko move down in the bottom 6 again, which I doubt would happen, there isn't really much room for it. Now, do I think that Blake Wheeler is the right answer for that? Currently, no. If he improves later on, then maybe yes. But then there's all these rumors about Patrick Kane and potentially signing him. He could be maybe a third line player as well later down the road, which should maybe happen in November wherever he goes. But I think as of right now, as we said, it might be a little too early. It's been 5 games. Wait for like another month into the season to see if he turns things around. But the Rangers should definitely keep a very close eye on Wheeler because they do have other options, whether you agree with them or not. But there are many other people who could fill that role.
And Collin, how are you feeling about that? And in particular, I want to know your thoughts on Eric mentioning there Patrick Kane maybe being an option to replace Blake Wheeler. I mean, at that point, you're replacing veteran with veteran. And I'm curious to know if that's a route that you think the Rangers should consider taking, or if you would just bank on the youth talent and the development of a guy like a Brennan Othmann to come in there and hopefully fill up some of that production that Wheeler's leaving behind.
Well, I'll start with Othmann. I've been very, very on the side of keeping him in the minors. I don't think that it would be wise for the Rangers to bring him up only to shove him into a bottom 6 role. I think he's a very skilled player, and I think that the bottom 6 role doesn't really suit skilled players extremely well, which is also why I'm going to go and say Patrick Kane I don't think would work well as a third liner either. You look at a guy like Vincent Trocheck, he's got a little bit of edge to his game. He just kicked the crap out of somebody in the last game. So, and Cooley, we've mentioned how he's gritty. He doesn't really back down. He's a big kid, so he's not afraid to throw the body around either. I don't think that you could really put finesse guys down in those lines. It doesn't really tend to work. It's not impossible, but those lines are typically more forechecking, kill minutes and defend lines. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and keep Othmann in the AHL and let him get those top 6 minutes, gain some confidence. And then when a spot opens up in the top 6, if it does, you afford him that opportunity. But I mean, you said it best. We saw it with Loff. We saw it with Kakko. It doesn't really benefit them to get the NHL minutes, even if it's just a few, as opposed to the more minutes in the AHL against good competition as well. When we look at Kane, and we talked about it in the last episode, I believe, or a couple episodes ago, he's an intriguing option. He was one of the most electric players, for me at least, in the playoffs last year. I thought he was one of the best skaters night in and night out. Leading up to the playoffs, he left a little bit to be desired, but he was injured. So, if he comes back healthy, I don't know how a skilled player would really do on that third line, but I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not. I would be more like leaning towards maybe making VC an every night player and putting him in on that third line before I go and dedicate a bunch of money to, as some fans might think, a washed Kane or, old Wheeler or young Othmann, who still has his whole future ahead of him.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jimmy VC there, and Eric, I want to get your take on that. Do you think that VC is a player that can maybe rise up into that role if Blake Wheeler continues to struggle, sending Blake Wheeler down, or even maybe making him a healthy scratch at some point? And rather than just, discussing VC, also curious to know your thoughts. How long of a time frame is it for Blake Wheeler to turn things around, in your opinion? Do you give him until the end of this month, the end of next month? How long do you think it takes before Peter Laviolette feels like he has to make a decision here regarding Blake Wheeler's playing time?
I mean, I could very well see like tomorrow night, if it really came down to it, maybe him be a healthy scratch, throw VC in the lineup, because we've been seeing that all season. Just the rotating between VC and Pitlick, which both have looked pretty good. I don't really have complaints to say about either of them. So I think it's good that they're continuing that rotation. But if Wheeler is playing bad game in and game out within the next like couple of games, I could easily see a healthy scratch. But as for something more drastic, like a call down and having like VC permanently take that third line spot, I would say if I were Laviolette, I would give him to the end of November to really turn things around. Because at that point, you're reaching the halfway mark of the season, around New Year's, and you're going to really want your team kind of finalized. And so you can really figure out the little minor cracks in your lineup to fill at the deadline. So, yes, it is still very, very early, but it's not going to stay early for much longer. So like we saw, like pretty much all of the kids had a rough start to the season. They each had 1 point going into Seattle. Everyone was on like the hot seat, calling everyone out. And then Seattle, they all kind of turned things around. Lafreniere scored, Kakko scored, Hedel had 4 assists. So one game could be a defining moment for anyone. Like all of a sudden one game, everyone's all off the kid's back. So like tomorrow night against Calgary, if he has a big performance, I could easily just change my mind about Wheeler if he gets something going.
Collin, how long are you waiting for the breakout performance from Blake Wheeler before you think that it's time to maybe decrease his playing time or take him out of lineup altogether?
Like I said before, I think there's a lot more than just the points when you look at a player. And for me, I'm willing to give him a little bit more of a leash just because you also have to remember he's stepping into a diminished role. Last season, he was playing top 6 minutes with the Winnipeg Jets. And I think playing less minutes is definitely going to hurt his point production. I think he's also still trying to find his footing with his line mates. It's a new system. It's a new team. And I think playing in a bigger market in New York, there's definitely a little bit more pressure. And I bet nobody's more critical of himself than he is. Like and Laviolette's probably got his finger on the pulse as well. But I think there's a lot more that goes into it other than just the points. For me, I'm willing to give him till at least the beginning of December, late November. I think that's a good timetable. That's right around when Kane said he wants to sign. So if you wanted to go that route, you could. But there's a lot of games left. I don't want to. I remember we were talking about how good he looked in the preseason, and then all of a sudden, that's like a 5-game stretch, and now 5 games into the season, we're like, oh, do we want to get rid of this guy already? I think the game is ebbs and flows, and again, being New York fans, we're extremely volatile, and it's what have you done for me lately? And he hasn't done a lot for us lately, and we're being maybe a little too critical. I think that we need to just pump the brakes and let him find his footing. And if he's still struggling in a month or a month and a half, then maybe we consider pulling the plug and we revisit this conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair and justified. I still think that it's too early to make any key decisions on Blake Wheeler, anything definitive. I think that it's something that Peter Laviolette should keep in mind. Maybe there is a change that will be made on the horizon, but right now, I think allowing Blake Wheeler to continue to go through the ebbs and flows, as you mentioned, Collin, and try to improve his play is what's going to be crucial here. But it'll be interesting to see if he is a fit for the Peter Laviolette system. I wonder if maybe that's part of it. As you just said, Collin, he's playing in a new system. All these players are. We know that Peter Laviolette is unlocking some extra potential from other players who are really beginning to stand out this year. Artemi Panarin in particular. I know you guys did an episode on him a couple episodes ago. But for Blake Wheeler, maybe he's not a fit in the Peter Laviolette system. And I think that's going to be the question here. Who fits in, who doesn't? That's something that Laviolette needs to determine over the course of the next few weeks and over the next month and a half. Maybe even. So I think it'll be intriguing to see how Blake Wheeler turns things around if he does, and if not, what the Rangers decide to do next. But of course, that pretty much wraps this one up. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And make sure to go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Rangers. Without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Rangers.